So Kissinger often gets a bad rap because of the cold mannerisms, Machiavellian behavior, and alleged war crimes. But Kissinger was a beast, and in this video, you will be shown just how formidable a Secretary of State he was. Now, the story you're about to hear is based on truth. I've read copiously on this man, and I've written a story that is very much based on the facts. But I'll also be recreating it as an action-adventure, sci-fi, fantasy, and opera. Again, everything you see is based on the truth. But the action sequences and superpowers and big tech battles are metaphors for the very real struggles this person faced during his career. Just a few disclaimers before we begin. Number one, much of this story is based on Kissinger's support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. The video is not an endorsement of Israel's conduct in Palestine today, but it does shed light on the time in which the country was fighting for survival. Second, I'm aware of just how controversial a figure this is. I want to make clear my commitment to telling stories regardless of who they are about. I'm not wedded to any particular ideology, and short of radical extremes, I intend on telling various stories from various viewpoints whilst having my character wrestle with various viewpoints during the story. Lastly, if at any moment the designs look similar to things out of Marvel or Star Wars or Warhammer, please know that this was not my intention. As things stand, AI tends to generate images that are very much based on pre-existing models. Without further ado, let's dive into it. World Order proudly presents the epic tale of Henry Kissinger. So the story begins with Nixon and Kissinger walking through the underground tunnels of the Soviet Union. Rats scurry across the floor as the two of them discuss the bombardment of their Israeli allies at the hands of the Egyptians. Now, this scene is based on the very real trip Nixon and Kissinger took to the Soviet Union in 1972. At the time, the Soviets were working on these weapons called MIRVs. These stood for Multiple Independently Targetable Re-Entry Vehicles, and till this day can carry various warheads, each capable of hitting a different target and multiple cities. Nixon and Kissinger had made it their mission to prevent the Soviets from developing these weapons. It was their fear that if they didn't, the Soviets would begin supplying them to the Egyptians and Syrians who wanted to do the Israelis harm. Much like in life, the two of them drift past the foggy tunnels regardless of those telling them not to do it. They walk across the state-owned ventilation systems and enter a room filled with Soviet Red Guards and Soviet Red robots. Having initially taken cover, Nixon puts the guards to sleep with his sensory powers, and Kissinger zaps the robots with his blue lightning. They scurry towards the window where they spot the Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev giving the Syrian president Hafez al-Assad a tour of his laboratory. Now, for those that don't know, Hafez al-Assad was the leader of Syria and was the toughest man Kissinger had ever dealt with. "Can you hear what they're saying?" Nixon whispers, trying not to disrupt the sleeping guards in the background. "I'll try," Kissinger says, mirroring the tone of his mentor. He clicks his glasses several times and zooms in on the devastating duo some 20 meters below them. "As you can see, my Soviet weapons are far beyond yours," Brezhnev says, whilst guiding Assad past the arsenal. I've made Brezhnev really smug. At the time, he was like the second most powerful man in the world, so I think, yeah, fair enough. Assad lifts his eyes. "You told me the weapons would be ready by now," he says, darting a glance as he says so. "Why aren't they?" "Patience, my dear friend, patience," Brezhnev says, without looking back at him. "The last thing we want is for you to go into anything unprepared." Now, this is a slight dig at the fact that Assad had lost to the Israelis several years earlier during the 1967 Six-Day War. Like someone else who's going to come up in this story, Assad really wants revenge on the Israelis and has come to the Soviets to get the weapons needed. "Henry, look," Nixon zaps. The two of them spot the Soviet scientist Alexander Nedoradze working on what appears to be a MIRV. "There he is," Kissinger says, now getting a little too excited. "If we can capture him now, then we can end this war." The Soviet robots Kissinger was responsible for suddenly come back online. "Tell our mutual friend not to panic," Brezhnev continues. "He will have his wish just as soon as we have ours." Nixon and Kissinger spin round to find the bots suddenly coming towards them. "You there, stop right now," maybe in like a Russian accent. "Darn it!" He smashes the glass and the two of them begin clobbering the numerous soft bots running towards them. Brezhnev watches from afar as the two of them make easy work of his forces. "Out of my way!" Brezhnev cries as he tosses a Soviet worker aside and makes for the escape pod with the others following his lead. "What are you doing?" Assad cries, standing between Brezhnev and the pod. "Together we can take these clowns and end their domination." "Not without my camera," Brezhnev says, looking at him with disdain. "And not without your weapon." He grabs Assad and the two of them board the pod as the underground laboratory begins exploding. Nixon spots Brezhnev and rushes towards him, slicing the Soviets in his way. Brezhnev and co board the escape pod and send the door crashing down before Nixon can break in. Brezhnev laughs, and it's one of those really evil laughs, and points at something as Nixon gets back up, spins round, and identifies a ticking time bomb just some several meters away. It's the most evil laugh you've ever heard as Brezhnev, along with Nadaradze and Assad, flies off in the escape pod. "Henry!" Nixon yells. Kissinger bashes some bots before looking up to find him. "The bomb!" Kissinger blasts the others out of the way before rushing towards the machine. Nixon is tackled to the ground by a Soviet superbot 10 times bigger than him. Kissinger hammers away at the keypads whilst Nixon gets back up and hurls the Soviet bot into a wall. "How are we doing, Henry?" Nixon yells. Kissinger's attempts prove futile again and again. The number goes from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. He closes his eyes, zaps the machine, and to his relief, the machine powers down. Everything powers down. The bomb, once beaming with light, powers down. His gamble pays off, but the closing shot shows an exasperated Nixon looking disappointed with his apprentice. So chapter 2 begins with Anwar Sadat standing angrily with the blood of a Soviet dripping from his sword. Now for those of you who don't know, Anwar Sadat was the president of Egypt. The scene you're about to see is based on the very real trip he took to the Soviet Union during the early 70s. Like Assad, Sadat was angry with Israel. They'd taken the Sinai desert off him several years earlier during the Six-Day War, and Sadat was now adamant about getting the territories back no matter what. "You promised me you'd have them ready by now," he says, referring to the weapons he expected to receive. "Your disregard for courtesy isn't improving your chances, Anwar," Brezhnev says, looking down at him from above. "I held my end of the bargain," Sadat shouts, referring to the attacks he'd launched against the Israelis. "I would have expected the mighty Union to have done the same." "Don't speak so soon, Egyptian." Sadat's eyes widen as he hears the creak of Soviet superbots slowly approaching him. "The Soviets deliver on those matters most pressing to us." The Soviet superbots come closer and closer. Sadat spins round and leaps into the air, where he comes crashing down and starts smashing the Soviet superbots left, right and centre. He slices one before turning round and slicing another. Brezhnev can't help but feel impressed by the president of Egypt, who no one had rated. And I'm not even kidding you when I say no one had rated this guy. You see, several months before this, Egypt's president, this really famous guy called Gamal Abdel Nasser, had passed away, and Sadat had stepped in, with many hoping that he'd fulfill the role left by Nasser. But no one actually believed Sadat would do it. And I mean everyone was mocking this guy. Kissinger called him a clown. Who's that guy who took out Nixon? The Assistant Secretary of State called him Nasser's poodle. Mossad, CIA, everyone was slating this guy. And yet the man comes in, kicks out 20,000 Soviet soldiers and demands Brezhnev for a better deal. It's for this reason that I'm presenting this scene in such a vivid, awesome way. Because Sadat was freaking sick, man. Sadat was the freaking guy, man. We come back to the story where Sadat is still clobbering the Soviet superbots trying to take him on. Brezhnev raises his hand and orders the Sovbots to back down. Sadat looks at him now, and Brezhnev simply says, "How many weapons did you say you needed?" We swap back to a scene outside the White House where Kissinger is walking with Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. Now, for those of you who don't know, Golda Meir is the Israeli Prime Minister and has come to America to ask for weapons. She asked Kissinger about his allegiance and who he truly belongs to. Kissinger remarks that he is first an American, second a German, and third a Jew. Meir cheekily remarks that in Israel they read the other way around. The scene is based on the growing relationship between these two during the early 70s. Kissinger recalls feeling much more himself around Meir than he did Nixon. But the meeting is interrupted when an aide informs Kissinger that there's been a disturbance in the WASAG meeting room. Meir bids Kissinger farewell and heads back to Israel to prepare for the worst. Kissinger walks into the meeting room where shelves begin to move and the ground begins to shake. Kissinger. Kissinger turns around but can't identify where this creepy voice is coming from. He falls to his knees when a gust of wind is unleashed by Sadat's hitman Hafez Ismail. Now, for those of you who don't know, Hafez Ismail is Sadat's national security advisor. Sadat was preparing for war, but wanted to see if he could resolve the matter peacefully before he went for it. Kissinger tries to grab the assistant. Whatever you're asking for, you won't get, Kissinger says. Is that so? The voice replies. It's like some really evil voice, right? The Egyptian moves his hand from left to right and shows Kissinger a glimpse of the vast destruction awaiting the Israelis. Give us the land, he says, and no harm will come to them. The Egyptians' gust of winds becomes stronger and stronger. The winds begin pushing down on Kissinger's face and tearing into his skin. It's as he reaches the brink that he stands back up, summons a lightning bolt, and fires it at Ismail. The security advisor crashes into the wall and lands on the floor. The United States will not be intimidated into any decision, he says, whilst walking towards the advisor who now kneels on the ground. Tell your president that he will have to wait in line just like everyone else. The security advisor gets up and runs away without looking back. Why did you do that? A court journalist says. After watching the action from afar, the Egyptians need to hit the Israelis, Kissinger says. What? It's the only way, he remarks, to restore their pride. The Egyptians will strike, the Israelis will retaliate, and that will then give me the perfect opportunity to fly in and settle the dispute before it gets out of hand. Such was the conversation Kissinger genuinely had with a journalist after he sent the security advisor packing. But just like everyone else, Kissinger had greatly underestimated Sadat. So chapter 3 begins with Hafez Ismail nervously entering Sadat's chambers. Before he even says anything, Sadat picks up a vase and smashes it into the wall. Every door I have opened has been slammed in my face, he roars. And again, these are genuine quotes, by the way. The United States will be committing the gravest error in its history if it continues to believe that we are crippled and can't take action. Sadat's spaceship flies to Damascus, where he meets and greets with Syrian President Hafez al-Assad, and you know what's about to go down. We switch over to the Sinai Desert, where Israeli soldiers pray together during the holy day of Yom Kippur. And I'm not even making this up, Sadat and Assad decide to strike at the Israelis during their holiest freaking day. The soldiers look up and see the Soviet-built Su-7s flying towards them. Get down! Israelis scream as over 200 of these blast their positions. Soldiers smeared with dirt and sweat run for whatever cover they can find. In the State Department, Assistant Secretary of State Joe Sisko barges past the Secretary of Defense James Schlesinger and tells Kissinger that they have a problem. In the Sinai, Israelis scream as the heat from the weapons peels off their skin. Hafez al-Assad lands in the Golan, where along with the Syrians he drives the Israelis off the top of Mount Hermon. I refuse to give in to the aggressive Israelis, shouts Secretary of Defense James Schlesinger. Such is the conversation he genuinely had with Kissinger after the latter burst into the meeting room and demanded that they send the Israelis support. We cannot give the Soviets and the Arabs the impression that we are separating too far from the Israelis, he belts. Back in the Sinai, IDF tanks are blown apart by the Egyptians wielding anti-tank Soviet missiles. Israelis are crushed by the Egyptian ground forces crushing over the Bar-Lev line. Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan watches as the soldiers he's raised are obliterated by shells. There's no way we can take them without the United States, shouts IDF tank commander Ariel Sharon. We have to try, Dayan demands. With me! They charge at the numerous Sovbots that have now entered the fight. Moshe Dayan smashes one in the face before turning around and dooming another. His spree comes to an end when he's suddenly lifted into the air by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. How sick is this battle, by the way? For those of you who don't know, the Saudis decide to get involved and help the Egyptians and Syrians. It came down to some little oil dispute. They wanted more money for their oil, and they believed that they could pressure the United States to give them more money by simply backing the Egyptians and the Syrians. In Jerusalem, people panic as General Yarif brushes past them, bursts into the television studio and orders everyone to stay calm. Women begin to pray. Men pick up their children and wrap them in blankets. Everything seems doomed when suddenly Kissinger arrives with the equipment, with the troops, with the armaments, with everything the Israelis need for a last chance. Golda Meir weeps, and I mean weeps, and I'm not even making this up. She can't stop crying when the equipment arrives. Future Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon leaps into the newly delivered tanks and begins charging down the thousands of Egyptians marching against him. "With me!" Kissinger yells as Israeli soldiers, now equipped with rocket boots and jetpacks, rally around him and follow his lead. In the Sinai, Moshe Dayan and the last of his men are surrounded by the Egyptians pointing their weapons at him. They're about to fire when they're suddenly interrupted by the arrival of Kissinger and the IDF. Boom! Pow! Kissinger and co mess them up and send them flying. Kissinger has this awesome shot where he walks towards Diane like an absolute boss. Like, even Stanley Kubrick is like looking at me from above right now being like, well done, Tay, well done. Israeli soldiers begin singing with joy. "With me!" Diane cries. Israelis begin firing on the enemy like nothing before. A massive tank battle erupts between the American-supplied M60 Pattons and the Soviet-made T-55s. This is freaking Rocky versus Drago here. Boom! 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 Ariel Sharon yells as he takes out several Egyptian tanks before him. Kissinger and Diane fight back to back, and I mean back to back. Diane sprays people with his laser guns, and Kissinger zaps people with his electricity. All is going well until they're knocked off their feet by Anwar Sadat landing in the battlefield. A few stupid soldiers try taking him on, but Sadat just cuts them down with his fiery green sword, man. "Fire!" Ariel Sharon cries, but the Israeli is caught off guard by Hafez al-Assad, who lands in the field, picks up his tank and tosses it aside. Moshe Dayan runs up and pushes Kissinger out the way as Sadat fires a green fireball at the two of them. "Ah!" Dayan cries as he gets back up and fires on the Egyptian. Doosh, doosh, doosh. Sadat blocks his fire with his wrists, uses telekinesis to grab Dayan by the neck and toss him into the floor. Kissinger summons a blue lightning sword and the two of them engage in the greatest sword fight you have ever seen. The greatest sword fight you've ever seen. Moshe Dayan gets back up and runs over to help Kissinger, but as he does so, he's blasted off of his feet by the telekinesis summoned by Hafez al-Assad. "Fire!" cries Sharon, whose tanks let loose a barrage of missiles and send the Syrian flying off his feet. "Moshe!" Sharon cries. "Now!" Dayan runs up and is boosted into the air where he knocks out Assad and leaves him in the dirt. "Fall back!" the Egyptian officer yells. Sadat pulls away from Kissinger as his forces abandon the battlefield. He takes one last look at our protagonist, who he blasts back with the strength of his chi. Kissinger gets back up and watches as Assad and the Egyptians flee from the battlefield. And this is based on the very real thing that happened, by the way. The Egyptians and the Syrians had to withdraw after the Americans and the Russians called on both Israel and the Arab states to withdraw. Okay, so this was a ceasefire put upon them by the United States and the Soviet Union, applying pressure from above. Kissinger is now free to negotiate a ceasefire with the Egyptians, feeling like they've got one on the Israelis. But as we're about to see, this is going to be so much harder than he'd originally anticipated. So chapter 4 begins with Kissinger entering Jerusalem. Hundreds of people have gathered at the Lod airport to celebrate his arrival. And again, I'm not making this up. When he arrived, he was literally greeted by hundreds of people chanting his name. It was the most moving moment, he said, of his entire career. He's taken to the Mossad facility where he's warmly greeted by Golda Meir. He arrives to tell her that they're hardly out the woods and that the Syrians and Egyptians are still standing by. But as he arrives, he's totally disarmed by the sheer amount of praise given by Meir. This next thing is something that no historian has actually been able to explain. Martin Indyk has given it a go, but he still says it's not officially proven. "You know," Kissinger says, now standing beside Meir, "you won't get any violent protests from Washington if something was to happen during the night as I fly back." Meir stops and looks at him. "If they don't stop, we won't. even if they do, Kissinger says. And again, these are genuine quotes. As he leaves the building, Meir gives the signal, and as day turns to night, Ariel Sharon orders his battalion to charge on the 30,000 Egyptians innocently abiding by the ceasefire agreement. In Washington, Kissinger denies any responsibility, but in secret, he calls Meir on the phone and demands that she lets the Egyptians go. "We didn't start the war," she says. "You didn't start the war, but you face the need for a wise decision to protect the survival of Israel." Again, these are genuine quotes pulled from the actual conversation. "You're saying we have no choice? That we simply have to accept the judgment of the United States?" Kissinger suggests reality and Meir loses it. "Okay, I'll call the cabinet and tell them we have to accept the US position or see the destruction of Israel then." Kissinger's spaceship flies to Cairo, where he's taken prisoner and escorted into an ornate room where he's brought to his knees before Anwar Sadat. And a host of his ministers, by the way. What business does an American in the service of Israelis have here in Cairo? It is the policy of the United States, Kissinger remarks, to not only defeat our enemies, but to bring them back to the community of nations. A man next to Sadat starts laughing. Sadat looks round and various others begin laughing. Sadat turns back round and even allows himself a chuckle. One man by the name of Mohammed El Ghamasi exhibits no such joy. "Untie his hands and bring him to me." Sadat takes Kissinger to the balcony from where the two of them gaze over the ancient city of Cairo. For several years now, the people of these lands have suffered under the hands of famine and poverty. I don't want this war any more than she does. But no such thing can come whilst Miss Meir still holds our lands. Kissinger's about to reply when he's suddenly interrupted by the Egyptian general Mohammed El Ghamasi, who storms into the room and denounces the American. "It's a lie," he blurts. "Calm yourself, Al Ghamasi." "I will not calm myself," he cries. "This man seeks to leave our people vulnerable to the Israelis." "Settle down, El Ghamasi," Sadat shouts, now looking at him straight in the face. This scene is 100% legit, by the way. El Ghamasi refused to sign the ceasefire terms Kissinger was proposing. He got so emotional that he had to excuse himself from the room because he was crying so much. He rushes out the building and tells his pilot to take him to Damascus. Kissinger thanks Sadat for placing faith in him, but informs him that they must now head to Israel before the situation breaks down. Chapter 5 begins with Kissinger and Sadat entering Jerusalem during the early hours of dawn. Kissinger is met by widespread condemnation, with people going as far as to hold up signs saying "Killinger." He heads to the Herzliya facility where Golda Meir anxiously prepares to hear his proposal. "What is he doing here?" she cries after spotting Sadat alongside him. Now, in reality, Sadat didn't actually come with Kissinger, but for the sake of drama and entertainment, I've added him to this scene. He's offering to make amends. Are you insane? My people have just lost their loved ones to this person's machinations. And again, Meir's hatred of Sadat and Assad is still very real at this time. Prime Minister, the hearings are about to begin. Kissinger walks into the courtroom where he finds Sadat conspicuously seated amidst the Israeli ministers staring snootily from above him. The court will now hear Secretary of State Henry Kissinger on behalf of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. Kissinger walks up, with various Israelis watching him to stay. The scene you're about to see is based on the very real hearings Kissinger had with Meir and her ministers. He takes to the podium, with Moshe Dayan and Ariel Sharon being the only people rooting for his cause. Prime Minister, people of Israel, it has long been the policy of the United States to not only defend your country, but to establish better relations between it and your neighbors. Egypt has offered to put aside their differences, and it is our hope that with the state of Israel doing that— Thank you, Dr. Kissinger, that'll be all. There's a pause as Kissinger looks up at the woman who has betrayed him. Is it a crime to want a unit back? And again, these are genuine quotes, by the way. "These were 2 wars in which we were attacked," Meir blurts. "A president who has attacked people twice in 7 years can't have what he wants. It's as simple as that. If you don't want an agreement, I can save you the trouble. I don't have to sit here dragging every bloody thing out of you. Minister upon minister stands to ease the situation. Kissinger and Mayer gaze at each other as various ministers attempt to pull them apart. A sudden rumble stops the commotion. Everyone in the room rushes to the window to find thousands upon thousands of Israelis running away from the Syrian invaders. To your stations. A massive battle breaks out between the forces of Israel and the forces of Syria. Machine guns are heard firing through the city. Get the women and children out! Kissinger fires at the incoming troops. IDF soldiers brush past the crowds and try and get Mayer to safety. A giant Syrian monster stumbles into the city. It takes out several buildings at a time. Anwar! A voice cries. Mohammed El-Ghamassi stands on top of the monster on Assad's behalf. Kissinger! This is your doing. Did you put him up to this? Mayer screams whilst looking at Sadat. Golda, please. Hundreds of people flee as the giant stomps closer and closer to their facility. Let us prove our commitment to you. Let us stop this beast before it destroys the city. The monster comes closer and closer. Golda, please. Go, Mayer cries. Just go already, or else we'll all die. Kissinger and Sadat run towards the beast. Where is he? Cries the monster. Where is Sadat? Kissinger and Sadat go behind it. Give me a boost. I'll fly up and place a lightning bolt in its neck. What? No way. You prop me up and I'll place my flaming sword into its neck. What? Boom. Boom. This is now my chance to prove my commitment to you. Please, let me do this. The scene is based on the growing friendship between Kissinger and Sadat during this period. Kissinger had to fly back and forth between Mayer and Sadat like on numerous occasions. It was called shuttle diplomacy. But in doing this, he develops a genuine friendship with Sadat, and he actually comes to prefer Sadat's company to Mayer. Boom! Boom! Alright, he says, but it's got to be now. Boom! Boom! Sadat runs up and Kissinger propels him into the air. He lands on El-Ghamassi and kicks him aside. Kissinger begins watching, but is suddenly called into action when he notices a Jewish woman holding her child and running from the beast. Help! She cries. Kissinger rushes in and stops the monster before the foot comes crashing down. El-Ghamassi gets back up and swipes at Sadat. Kissinger uses all his might to push the monster back. He has super strength, by the way. He angrily hurls a blue lightning bolt at the monster. Ha 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 ha, the monster cries. Purely human. Kissinger quips another lightning bolt, but it's grabbed before he can throw it. Sadat! He screams. Sadat finishes off El-Ghamassi before turning back round. What are you waiting for? Sadat snaps out of his shock, leaps into the air, and drives his weapon into the monster's skull. The beast lets out a roar before falling down and crashing onto the ground. Syrian forces, once relying on the beast, panic and flee. Sadat rushes over and helps the Secretary of State back up. A stillness descends on the city. Hundreds of people are heard weeping and lamenting the death of their loved ones. Mayer is spotted weeping as one of her colleagues, an 18-year-old intern, is found dead. This is based on the very real tragedy that befell the Israelis during this time. As they were trying to negotiate withdrawal from the ceasefire lines, they were attacked by Islamist terrorists who killed several dozen innocent civilians. And I just want to take a moment to say that yes, I am making action-adventure stories here, but these were genuine people whose lives were genuinely and tragically affected by the events of this story. People of Israel! A noise comes from the loudspeakers positioned all over the city. Hear me! The people of Jerusalem turn around to find a large screen at the center of their city with the oversized face of Hafez al-Assad. This is now your last chance. Give back the territory or pay with your lives. You monster, Mayer cries. You lunatic! Dyer has to hold her back. We will not barter with you, Assad. Then it will come at your peril. If you have not surrendered the territory within 60 minutes, then I shall unleash the very weapon that your supposed champion failed to deny me. Choose wisely, Israelis, or never choose again. The television screen switches off. People begin to panic. Kissinger begins walking. Where are you going? Where do you think? You can't go against him. He's too powerful. And allow these people to die. I'm coming with you. If you come with me now, your legacy shall be forfeit. Then it is forfeit. I'm coming too. She needs you. Your people need you. Stay here and defend them. Anwar, Dr. Kissinger, long ago you told me that it is our policy to not only defeat our enemies, but to bring them back into the community of nations. Kissinger and Sadat walk towards the ship. "If I don't come back," Kissinger says, "here." He hands back the staff that Meyer gave him earlier. "Greater men will have more use of it than I will." Meyer looks up and hands it back. "Keep it," she says. "You'll need everything you can get." Kissinger gives her one last look before we flash forwards to the spaceship taking off. Meyer watches as the man she would otherwise have called her son flies off. We come to Damascus, where Hafez al-Assad is laughing ecstatically as his nuclear weapon is tested effectively. "Yes," he cries, "finally! At last I have my weapon. At last I shall have my reward." I get that I'm presenting Assad as a really cartoonish villain, but you know, this is like an action adventure, so yeah. Kissinger's blue Imperial spaceship lands nearby, and he and Sadat come out and run towards the place where they see a green energy beam emerging. We swap back to Assad, waiting for his ultimate weapon to reach full enrichment. "There it is, my associates. It won't be long now." By the way, the associates are the Saudis, who at this point are still supporting the Syrians. "It won't be long now. Enrichment shall soon be complete, and the state of Israel shall be no more." "Not so fast, Assad." Kissinger and Sadat emerge from the top of a sand dune, standing beside one another and looking heroic. "After them!" The Gulf princes rush towards them. Sadat and Kissinger leap out the way. Assad rushes towards the machine. "Out of my way," he says as he tosses an IT operator aside. A massive battle commences between our two heroes and the rest. Assad tries accelerating the launch. "Is there no way to speed this up? I was going as fast as I could." "Ah!" he shouts. He breaks the seal off the crate. "What are you doing?" "I was saving this for my celebration parade." But alas, desperate times call for desperate measures. Kissinger takes on one, Sadat takes on another. Assad runs at Kissinger. The two of them clash swords. Sadat takes out the last of the Saudis before turning round and spotting the fight. He runs at Assad. Assad knocks Kissinger to the ground before spinning round and blasting Sadat. Kissinger gets back up and punches him in the face. He grabs him by the collar and throws him into the wall. He looks for a Sadat, who struggles to get up from the floor. He rushes towards him but is knocked off balance by Assad, who flies into him and smashes him into the floor. "And to think that I was considering you a partner," he says, whilst landing him with blow after blow. "It's over, Kissinger. You've lost. Israel will perish, your allies will fall, and the United States will watch as the Soviets run the world." Whoosh! Sadat gets back up and blasts Assad into the wall. The Syrian falls flat on his back, never to get back up again. Sadat remains standing for a brief moment before falling to the ground. Kissinger runs over and tries to help him back up. "Don't," Sadat says, barely able to say anything. Kissinger looks down at the sizable burns on the Egyptian's body. "I've got to get you to the hospital." No. Kissinger looks at the man he's come to call a friend. Sadat looks back at him and smiles. He places, and this is based on truth by the way, he places his hand on Kissinger's cheek. "Mr. Secretary," and the following is genuinely the last thing he said to Kissinger before bidding him farewell. "Mr. Secretary, you are not only a friend, but a brother." And with that, the Egyptian leader dies in Kissinger's arms. Now, the death didn't actually play out this. Sadat would die many years later at the hands of Egyptians who were against him making peace with Israel. But I think this scene captures everything so well. I'm ending the scene by having Kissinger looking down with tears in his eyes and holding the Egyptian leader in his arms. So we're going to conclude with something that is again based on reality. Kissinger arrives in Israel to widespread applause and celebration. Those who once criticized him now cheer with joy. Along with Sadat's representative, he walks towards Meir, who looks down on him like a proud mother. As they did in real life, Kissinger and Meir embrace, and along with the Egyptians agree to a ceasefire. There's a really great moment where Kissinger walks up to her and kisses her on the cheek, and Meir cheekily remarks, "I didn't know you kissed women," because the amount of times Kissinger had to kiss the cheeks of male Middle Easterners during this entire thing is really quite funny actually. The ceasefire eventually results in the Camp David peace agreement of 1978, where Egypt and Israel finally agreed to peace. Now, what you take from the story really comes down to you, but if I had to depict something, I would insist that it reveals how cultural differences don't necessarily have to result in war. Before Kissinger, no one believed this kind of deal could be achieved. And I get that this man has his critics, and perhaps one day I'll make a story which is a bit more critical of him. Maybe he's the villain in a story. But on this occasion, he deserves credit. His strong leadership and practical diplomacy has resulted in a peace that, as of this recording, has still lasted. The reading for this was based on Kissinger, the biography by Walter Isaacson, The Price of Power, Kissinger in the Nixon White House by Seymour Hersh, and Master of the Game, Kissinger and the Art of Middle Eastern Diplomacy by Martin Indyk. I haven't been paid to promote these, but I highly recommend them for anyone wanting to know more about this fascinating period. Guys, many thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this episode, then do give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, subscribe. World Order takes the globe's greatest figures and tells their stories as epic works of action-adventure, sci-fi, fantasy, and opera. It is my ultimate goal to get so good that I leave you with the same feeling I had when I was a 7-year-old boy watching Star Wars for the first time. Be sure to follow me on all available social media. I'll put them in the description below. And be sure to hit the bell icon as well so that you can stay up to date with all future uploads. I'll be releasing my next story again on the Middle East, except this time it'll be like 50 to 60 years before, during the First World War. And this time it'll be from the perspective of a Middle Easterner rather than a Midwesterner. I'm not going to constantly come back to the Middle East. I will explore other theatres of the globe. I want to do stories on China, on America, on the UK, on as many theatres of the world as I can, man. So yeah, guys, please do hit like, do hit subscribe, and hit the bell icon. I really hope to hear from you all in the comments below. Thank you so much for your time.